Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. It's Jake Swilly here with my man Scott Lawyer, and today we're going to actually be taking on one of the biggest topics in football over the last couple years, and actually over the last couple weeks now in the game, and that's the targeting rules. Now over the years, this has been a big controversial topic within football at the college and NFL levels, primarily at the college level for its kind of repercussions that come with it.
Right.
And like I said, I don't think the discussion or the controversy has come around the rule itself, but I think it's come around sometimes how it is called and then the repercussions mainly of it. So what we're going to do today, being who we are at Atavus, being a tackling company that promotes near shoulder tackling to avoid these kinds of incidents of targeting, head contact, and those things. We're going to talk about it from our side, but we're going to review what the rule is, kind of what the process is and how they call it and analyze it and repercussions of it at the level. And then we're going to talk over some examples and kind of give our take on it. And then, kind of just review what maybe we can do to amend the rule going forward. Maybe some of the side effects that a rule does right now, and some of the other things that that people are saying about the rule and how it's changed it, and give our take on that. So, first, let's start with what targeting is. And this is the part that isn't really, I don't think, debated in terms of the rule itself and people thinking it's wrong or whatnot. But this is the basics of it. We're going to bring it to you in kind of a scaled down paraphrased version that's a little simpler instead of the textbook or rule book definition. But that first point being basically making forcible contact with the crown of the helmet. So dipping the head, going into contact, initiating contact with really any part of the body with your head going down in the crown of the helmet. That's seen as targeting, leading with the head, really. So that's no one debates that. The next point, making forcible contact to the head and neck area, primarily of a defenseless player, right? So someone who's a defenseless player, not able to really make a football move or protect themselves, or a lot of the time a quarterback, a passer, right? This doesn't have to be with the head. This can be with the shoulder. This can be with the forearm, but any kind of forcible contact to the head and neck area as well. And the last piece, initiating contact with the helmet to any part of the body, called at both levels, but this was really made a staple rule a couple of years ago in the NFL, and this actually goes for both sides. So even if a running back or a runner lowers his head and makes contact going, it doesn't always get called, but that's the rule. Going into contact, that would be called as well. So any kind of leading with the head to any part of the body is considered targeting. So those are the main rules. Scott, is there anything I missed in terms of just what it is?
No, I think you hit all the main bullet points on the head. It is, no pun intended, but it is. We're gonna talk a lot about this on why it's not subjective in a lot of cases, but the game is so fast nowadays, especially with the athletes that are playing it. It does really place an emphasis on not only tackling, but situational awareness and the coach, or not the coach, but the refs' ability to call these things in real time and also look at it in slow motion, be able to use these definitions and make it as black and white as possible. That way there's no gray area in between. Very similar to what we do, right, Jake? When we slow down film and we have to actually look at it in slow motion versus real time, it changes things. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to have some visual examples, and hopefully we, come to be able to have a good debate on and discussion on the rule of targeting.
Agreed. Yeah, you brought up the review process, so let's take a look at what that is. And so college NFL, they have the luxury of instant replay, and so once these plays and these calls are made for targeting on the field, they're automatically reviewed and to confirm whether or not it is targeting. So if it's confirmed it is targeting, that rule is final, right? And then a player can appeal for it, or a team can appeal the call after a game because of the repercussions that come with it. As well. But it also can, so if the refs don't call it on the field at both levels, the booth upstairs can also make a call down to the ref saying, hey, we want you to review this as a potential targeting call as well. So that is the other option. So there's multiple eyes on it, not just the refs trying to make the call in real time, but we do have other eyes on the field looking at it as well. But the one thing I want to know, just because I went through this playing at lower level division college football, you know, 1AA and D1 had that instant replay for the most part, right? And so play happens, they can review instantly, and then a call is made. You know, D2, D3, we don't have instant replay. We have games being filmed, obviously, but we don't have the luxury of, if a targeting call is made, being able to review it right away and determine if a player can stay in the game or not. I actually had one of my years in college, this happened to our defense in the first half for a player where he got called right away. And once you get called, there's no review, you're out no matter what. And then they have the ability to review it at halftime on the video. So potentially there is a situation where a player gets called for targeting at the D2 or D3 level, gets, you know, has to sit out that half and the rest of the game. Let's say it happens in the first half, right? And then they go at halftime review and say, oh, that's not targeting actually after the review. That's a whole first half of play that you missed from that player. Now, luckily, it gets to come back, but that's kind of one of the downfalls of this process. And I don't know how you fix that, but in this case, it is a little bit of downfall. But like I said, the repercussions I just kind of mentioned. So let's take a look at that before we get into the examples. This is one of the main, I think the main controversy, or one of the two parts of the main controversy that people have with, especially in college. So, and it differs between the NFL and college a little bit. In college, if you get called for targeting and it is confirmed, it's an automatic ejection from the game. They've amended the rules, so now the player can stay on the sidelines. They don't have to go to the locker room like they used to. Thankfully, they changed that rule. But if you get a targeting call and ejected in the first half, you're out basically. If you get ejected, you're out that half that you get ejected in, and the next half, whatever that may be. So if it happens in the first half, it's the remainder of the game. If it happens in the second half of a game, you're then out. That player is out the first half of the next game, which can be crucial as well. And again, once they can make appeals after the game to get that amended and stuff like that, but it's not always guaranteed. In the NFL, it's an automatic. I should say it comes with a 15-yard penalty in college as well. In the NFL, it's a 15-yard penalty, but you know, looking at the rule book, it appears that the disqualification or ejection is kind of at the discretion of the official. So it's not an automatic. We've seen a lot of times where they do get disqualified from the game, but it isn't an automatic like it is in college. So I think that's why the focus here is really on college and that rule, or the repercussion for it, because of the automatic ejection once it's confirmed. And that's where a lot of the controversy comes out, because it is such a game-altering call. So we'll kind of get into the weeds of that here in a little bit. But first, let's look at kind of those examples of when we talk about what targeting is, the different types of targeting that we see. So Scott, walk us through this first one here. This would be an example of leading with the crown of the helmet going into the player, right?
Yeah. So this one's pretty clear. Great example here. But a lot of times when I'm watching games, whether it be at the college or NFL level, when we get plays like this, I would say, Jake, about 80% of the time, the announcers and the announcers primarily always like, what is he supposed to do in the situation, right, Jake? What's the defender supposed to do? Well, there's a lot of things he can do. One is to keep your head up, and what we talk about at Atavus is a neutral neck. So seeing what you're hitting, your eyes above the sunglasses in a sense. And a lot of our drills, they reinforce that when it comes to contact. We want your eyes up in a neutral position to see. The old saying is see what you hit. It's the same thing here. So dipping your head and lowering, especially to a quarterback or a defensive player, is automatically going to get you that penalty. But the refs are always, not the refs, but the announcers, they always drive me crazy when they ask that question. And it really comes down to situational awareness, like I talked about, and just knowing, being able to keep your head up and be situationally aware of where your strike zone is at, and where you're hitting. That way you can avoid these penalties as much as possible. But as we know, the game is very fast. So a lot of times when those quarterbacks, for example, they step up into the pocket and they get out, for about 10, 15 yards and they're going full speed, and they all of a sudden on a dime, they slide. It is really hard. And it does come with the territory of, like, you have to make a split decision at 110 miles per hour. I get that. But I think they are avoidable just by teaching and reinforcing the habit and being able to show them examples of what's good and what's bad. I think it was a few years ago, or yeah, a couple years ago. You remember Pickett or Kenny Pickett had that fake slide, and they made a rule off of that because they put the defender at a disadvantage because like, okay, now we have to play for a fake slide. So it goes both ways, right? For the offense and the defense, it's just about trying to, increase that situational awareness, Jake.
Yep. No, and I think in this example in particular here, I would say this is inexcusable. I don't see an argument ever for something like this, dipping the head going into contact. This is avoidable no matter what situation you're in. I don't think any situation calls for a dipping of the head in this fashion, right? You talked about neutral neck, seeing what you hit. I think you can do that at all times. I think it's an obvious call and it's an obvious tell when someone actually deliberately dips their head going into contact. Now, incidental head contact is a whole different discussion, I think, for us and how we view it. And I think in general, because that stuff happens. That's not what we're talking about here. This is a deliberate dipping of the head going into contact. The other head contact piece that gets brought up is that people kind of are controversial on at times, but making head contact with any part of the body. This is a call from college football player a couple of years ago that, everyone kind of was, not on board with at the time, right? Because it wasn't head contact. But if you watch the clip, if you watch this game, you see it here. It is a leading with the head contact to the body, which again is something at Atavus we don't want. We want to make sure we're making near shoulder contact as much as we can. But yeah, walk us through your take on this part of the rule.
Yeah, so now we're getting into that gray area of, here I remember this call specifically, and this was tough because Fields, I believe he like kind of spun at the last minute, and it changed the tackler's, strike point, strike zone in a sense. So here, this is a little bit tough, right? Because you have a moving target. But by definition, I think they ruled that his head was dipping, right? He wasn't a defensive player, but they said he led with the crown of his helmet.
Yeah.
So the biggest thing I can say here is with a play like this, I would say it's more of a bang-bang play. But this one is more tied to not situational awareness, but tackling technique and being able to track and also change your strike point and strike zone on a dime. But Jake, we always talk about we have drills that replicate these situations because a lot of things that I talk about with our analyst group is we never want to grade a play or critique a player on a technique that we cannot solve with a tackling drill of our own. So in a situation like this, we have multiple drills where almost like I would say even like our sumo drill, for example, right, Jake? Split second, he can spin, he can come around those cones, and you got to be able to strike when the time is right. Almost be kind of patient, but also dip your shoulder and maneuver your head to get to that vantage point for the best, shoulder contact, keeping the head out. So in this example, when that target is on a dime is spinning, you have to have the presence of mind and also the skills to try to get your head out of the equation. But I remember this call; it was very tough for the player. Yeah. As a former linebacker, I know it's very, very conflicting for him.
Yep, no, I agree with that. These aren't always easy calls, and they lie into that gray area. But like you said, like we referred to, if you're executing the technique properly, like we talk about in our system, and you're tracking the near hip, and you come in and close space under control, you're able to react to a runner and kind of switch your strike zone, your target zone, as you go into it, to adjust your body to avoid head contact. The next example we want to kind of talk is hitting to that head and neck area. So this is an example, targeting call in the NFL a few years ago.
Yeah.
Again, it's not a helmet to helmet contact, right? So that part of the equation is not leading with the head, not leading with the crown, but it's making forcible contact to the head and neck area. And again, I think, this could lie in the gray area as well, right? He goes kind of tall. The other player, and this is, again, probably a bang-bang play. The other player dips his head, as you can see, which is not ideal either. But I think there's some things that can be said in terms of technique that would, avoid this type of situation as well.
Yes. I see this most commonly in the NFL, but also we call at Atavus is a coverage tackle, meaning that the main priority of the defender was, trying to dislodge the ball or force a breakup. So a lot of times in those situations, the runner or the ball carrier is going to be airborne. So in this example, he is airborne. He's probably coming down from a catch. And a lot of times with safeties, you know, because those days with like Ed Reed and Palomalu just coming over and just popping you at the right minute and having that ball pop out, the big hits that people love, we can't really do that anymore for good reason, because a lot of times the defender, the runner is defenseless and also is very forcible, unnecessary contact. So one thing I'll talk about here, the main thing I always see is the punch in the wrap here. So mainly you see in this example, although Smith is going up high, he also has that pinned arm and going across the body of the runner. So if he was able to get that near shoulder, but also throw an aggressive punch, I think that would discourage the ref from throwing a flag, because he's hitting within the strike zone, but also he's doing it in a, what's the word I'm looking for, in a more controlled way where it looks, not looks, but he's going to be able to control the runner to the ground, versus in these type of hits when they have the arm pinned like that and they're going for the proverbial, you know, kill shot. A lot of times it's just that blow up hit where he's no longer in contact with the runner. So it looks, the optics of it is very violent, and to the naked eye in real speed, a lot of times the refs will call the flag, and I would say 90% of the time it does hold up.
Yeah, no, for sure. And again, this gets more into the gray area in this last example, visual example we have. So this was a call made last year that if anyone watches College Game Day morning, every Saturday morning, that they actually had a segment one week with, I believe he was either the kind of the head of officiating or rules committee for college football, something along those lines, had him on talking about what is the targeting rule, going through examples, what it is, what it isn't. This is one of them, the plays that they brought on as well. And in the game, it was called a targeting. It was reviewed on film. It was confirmed targeting. But on the game day morning, the rules committee had actually in real time, he said this shouldn't be targeting for. If you go find the clip, it's basically the player catches it. He's near the goal line. He makes a football move, diving, lunging that ball to the goal line, and this player comes in trying to stop it. You see, like, there's probably incidental head contact, but he's not leading with his head. He's leading with his shoulder. Ideally, it's not the near shoulder where he keeps his head out. But again, I think it's where the controversy comes in. A play like this was confirmed targeting, where people, even within the referee, the official side of things, didn't see it that way. And so there's a gray of how do you call it? How do we make this more of a consistent call? And, you know, I'd say this isn't targeting. This is a play where they're it's not ideal form in terms of the Atavus technique, but this is a play where he's trying to, in real time, stop a score versus trying to target the player. And again, this is a time where, you know, there's not a lot of options for the tackler or defender, because the player is so low and the player's head is kind of dipped already. There is only so much, like you said, you alluded to earlier. We can only grade things based on what we can tell a player or coach, right? And if we can't tell them that there's something they should have done differently, or kind of realize what the situation entails, then we're not going to really grade it or be too critical. I think this is one of those situations. And so this is where the second part of, not the repercussions, but how it's graded or how it's called in the field, is kind of the other part of the controversy. But give us your take on this kind of play, and, you know, the targeting aspect of it.
Yeah, these ones are always very tough because they're very, very, very situational. In a goal line situation like this, it's hard to make that judgment call. And I remember this call. It was one of the more controversial ones because of the situation and you know, he's trying to reach that ball around. He's literally diving almost diagonally. You know, he's almost like a plane taking off, like what we'd look for not to happen as tackler. And defender's coming from more of a lateral situation. He has to, you know, try to get across to prevent his momentum from going. So the only thing here was just that incidental head contact, which kind of, you know, drew the ref to call that flag, and ultimately it was ruled as targeting. But this is one of those tough ones, Jake, where sometimes you kind of got to factor in the you know, the play and what's going on in that situation. But yeah.
So to wrap this up, we have a few points we kind of want to hit on in terms of like scoping of what can be done to change it. What are some of the things being said about the rule right now? Kind of our take on it. So the first thing, Scott, I kind of want to bring up with you and get your take on is, and out of this, we talk about behavioral change that, we think the root of it starts with the players and coaches themselves and getting them to change their, or alter or just go through, a new technique rather than applying rule changes. It was interesting in that, like I said, that clip, if you go find it online last year with that same college game day clip, the head of the rules committee, he actually speaks to how the rule has improved the game, the targeting rule, and how it has actually changed the behavior of players. And so there's multiple tangents we can go off on this. I think we think here, and Scott, give us your take, that behavioral change starts at the root, in practice, with technique, with coaching, not with rule changes. Applying those things. I think rules, in this case, rule changes are definitely necessary. There definitely necessarily needs to be a targeting rule, right? We can't have, those things omitted from the game, leading with the head and those sorts of actions. But at the same time, I don't think that's the ultimate solution to this problem that we see. So give us your take on, how do we handle this problem, at the root of it, of targeting and kind of eliminating this action going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's really three phases to this, Jake. Let's start with the players. It's the most important. I do believe that when it comes to behavioral change, it's not going to come from a rule. That's not what's going to help change behavior. It's going to be from creating muscle memory in a system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a system and infrastructure that's put into place to help the athletes be more aware of their surroundings, but also the proper ways to combat these calls, right? So being able to lower your strike zone on a dime, being able to track for effective shoulder contact so you're never in that situation, being able to secure a tackle the right way, midpointing the ball, but also, not going for that kill shot or targeting, on a defenseless player. Those are all things that, although tough and maybe seem kind of routine, you can definitely drill those throughout the week. That way it shows up on Saturday and Sunday. That's the first thing. Second is going to be the coaches. The coaches, they have to reinforce these good habits through, one, showing good example. I know for me, Coach Peterson, he was big about showing us. So on film, if there was a targeting call in the previous week at any of the Pac-12 games or whatever, he was going to show us like 3 or 5 of them, like, this is targeting, here's how they're showing it, or here's how they're calling it now. We have to be aware of these situations. And if we ever had one of those plays, he would show us in the meeting, like, hey, here was targeting. We tried to appeal it, but based on this criteria, it was ruled a targeting. So we actually had a couple of those my senior year, and it actually forced me to start a couple games, because we have our starting linebackers out, and it was big. It was a couple big calls. I remember one was against USC over in the Coliseum. And Azim Victor got kicked out of the game on a pretty tough call, but they called on the quarterback, and it was one of those situations that we had to learn from. So yeah, I think it's a coach, because you don't want your players losing time. You don't want your best players losing time, and especially at the college level. You don't want them out of the game and potentially missing the second half of the next game. So that was big. And the last thing, I think it comes with the refs. So the refs need more training on this as well, because as we know, in this business, everything is going full speed. So being able to call something in real time when it's, having that discretion of what's actually going on is very tough for the normal eye to see. But being able to have a ability to kind of discuss these amongst the staff, the other, refs on the field, and maybe even having some calls that come in, being able to make the right call, even when you put it in slow motion, you slow it down. I think that's where we have a little bit of disconnect, where some of these calls are slightly situational and kind of a bang play, where I think we can kind of rule in the side of the favor of the player in some of these cases. But like I said, it's going to take a collective change here when it comes to, again, having that system and then implementing the structure to help the players and the coaches be better.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I mean, some of the points you bring up in those phases is interesting, right? With the coaches in particular, that's something with our conversations over the years we've heard. Like you can apply a rule, right? But what coaches are teaching their players ultimately is going to affect their behavior. And some of those times it is a little, what is taught within programs, within teams doesn't always line up. I think for the most part that change has happened. We've seen near shoulder being the focus within all levels of football going forward, which is great to see. But like you said, it starts with the coaches and the programs of behavioral change and muscle memory and those things. And then, like you said, the rest. So the way the rule is phrased right now, it's either confirmed or overturned. There's no really middle ground. And we know how calls are made today, and the fact that
Right.
it has to be indisputable evidence, right? And I think a lot of the times that goes when the call is already made in the field, right? They have to have indisputable evidence of overturning it. And so I think the ability for them to kind of side with the players like we do, right? At times is a little more difficult for them to do on the officiating side. So that might be another change we would like to see in terms of this rule in particular going forward. So next, all right, let's get into now maybe the what are the side effects to the targeting? All right, we talked about behavioral change, and that's one thing, right? But it's also on the field changing behaviors, maybe for some negative effects that have come for this, that has stemmed from people altering their bodies. And I think one of the side effects that this rule being a band-aid to this side effects from the rule is players altering their bodies going into contact, right? People aren't, obviously don't want them dipping their heads, but this is now, deterring players from going in anywhere close to being high to the head and neck area. And I think from that we see, I think we see a lot of the times maybe people going lower, going at, leg level, going at even like knees and ankles and stuff like that. And we all know as former players here that when your knees and ankles go or something happens to them, that can be a catastrophic injury. And that's a potential big risk and side effect that I think we've seen come from this rule. So, Scott, let's talk about then. Do you agree with this? Do you see this this trend going on right now in the game, where people are, maybe forced to go lower, or yourself being a linebacker, right? Is that something you think, when you were playing the game that you did subconsciously because of this?
You know what? That's a great question, Jake. I think there's two things that go into it. One is, first off, that defenders are usually compromised in these situations because you got guys that are 230, big quarterbacks like Josh Allen, whoever it may be, running through the middle, and also you got guys that are shifty out in space that can move on and switch speed and direction on a drop of a dime, and your aiming point is always changing. So yeah, it's a lot. It's about really what it comes down to is situational awareness, first and foremost, to answer your question. And then second, yes, as being a linebacker, I've been in those situations where you're kind of forced to, you might have to go low. Personally, I refrain from doing that. If anything, I would tackle too high. That would be my big thing. But I didn't actually like going at people's ankles. I felt like that was kind of putting me at a disadvantage a lot of times. Even when it came to taking on blockers, playing against like the Stanfords and all those guys that want to run those power plays at you. Some coaches believe that, hey, we want to take those old linemen's legs out, but I never was a big fan of that when it comes to block destruction or tackling in particular. So yeah, I feel for that because I know as an offensive player too in high school and everything, that was the worst feelings, having guys go at your legs. And I feel like that's how the game is evolving, unfortunately, because at the end of the day, guys don't want to get targeting calls and get suspended and kicked out of games. So they're like, okay, I'm going to go low on these guys. And then again, when you have like the Derrick Henrys and all those guys, those bigger bruising running backs or runners of the ball, guys are compromised in this unfortunate situation. But I think it's something that over time, not right now, they're not going to happen overnight, but over time with behavioral change and, working towards it, I think we can get to a common ground, Jake.
Yeah, no, I agree. From my perspective, playing days, I played both sides of the ball, and from a running back perspective,
right,
I agree with you too. There's only so many things you can do when they go low. Especially my least favorite scenario is when they dove or went after your knees from directly in front of you. There's not a lot you can do to protect yourself. You just kind of have to jump in the air and jump over them.
And that puts you at a disadvantage too, right? When you're 2 feet off the ground, is
exactly
terrible. Yeah.
Yeah, if you try and dive over, now you're doing the what we tell people, at least on the defensive side, not to do, and leave your feet, and that leaves you exposed, not control of your body and stuff like that. But the alternative is leaving your feet in the ground, getting stuck, and your knee getting blown out, right? And so it puts now the offensive player at a compromised position. We don't want anybody on the side of the ball, on both sides of the ball, to get hurt or injured or be in a compromised position like that. But on the other side, I was a safety for most of my career when I played on that side of the ball. And I can understand what it might be like to be compromised in that position, especially on passing plays, right? You're told, one of your primary roles as a pass defender, to break up the pass, knock the ball out, and separate the receiver from the ball, whatever way you can.
Mhm.
Well, a lot of the times the ball's being caught around that head or neck area above, or chest area. So your alternative is, if you can't get your hand on it, to hit them hard with your shoulder, and try and knock them loose. Well, you do that, you risk a potential penalty from that. So what do? Do you go low and maybe let them catch it, and do what your instinct is not to do, and or do you go high and separate it and risk the penalty? So there's a performance and injury perspective, safety perspective, that I think, at least from my point of view on that, it would be hard to deal with. And then, as a player, when you're second guessing yourself in the middle of a play, that's not safe for anyone either. You don't want to be doing that, and put everyone in compromised positions. So, yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think that's probably the biggest, or one of the main side effects that have come from this, is just putting more players in compromised positions than would be. Let's move on to the next point we want to talk about with this. And the repercussions are largely the biggest talking point on this subject. And so a lot of people want to amend the penalty, especially in college, right? We actually, we've seen so far in the last few weeks, halfway through point of the NFL season, this be an issue as well lately. But it's not an automatic penalty. They're not an automatic ejection, right, in the NFL, but college it is. And so that's where a lot of the controversy comes in. So there are some opportunities in the rule book itself to kind of change the repercussions of the rule. I know some that have been floated out there and been talked have been things like making the rule, the repercussions for it, based on like an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty, where instead of an automatic ejection, if you get one in a game, you get a warning. The second one is out, or something like almost like a tiered system. You see it's kind of in soccer with yellow and red cards, but also like on a certain number of offenses, right? You get one, it's a warning, but that warning may carry over to the next game. So if you get a targeting call in the next game, then you're kicked out. Or if you have 2 or 3 or 4 over the span of the year, and then by the end of the year, you maybe have a certain amount built up. Based on that amount, maybe that warrants either a warning or an ejection or a suspension for multiple games, or some tiered system like that. Do you think any of those are good solutions to this rule, or is there one you favor yourself?
Yeah, I actually like that a lot. I think it's funny you brought up soccer, because I had to stop playing soccer because I had basically red cards every game. So I don't know if that approach would work when it comes to someone like myself, but yeah, no, I think the repeat offender type behavior would be more, the right approach to go. So yeah, in a game, it's very hard to say, okay, off one bad play, is that the person's intent? Was that the tackler's intent or defender's intent to cause harm or target? It's very hard to say that. I mean, there would be a handful of plays that I can say, okay, that dude was trying to hurt somebody or being malicious. But I do think it definitely should be a tier system where, first one's a warning, and then if it happens again, hopefully it wouldn't happen in that game. I highly doubt it would. But if it happened in that game, then yeah, ejection maybe. But then over the course of a season, maybe like your third one is a full game. Your second offense is a half, right? And I think at that point, that would create more of an understanding and a chance for this behavioral change that we're looking for versus this throwing the book at them on the first time that it happens. It's kind of tough.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. I think that would probably be the best approach because it's not only just the standard kind of penalty for it that it is right now, and that it doesn't really carry over. It's severe at the time, but it doesn't carry over the next game. This would, that probably inspire people to change behavior more and more. Know that okay, it's not just a half or a game. Now it's maybe 2 games if you got 4 by the end of the year or something like that. So. And then you can keep track of, just keep track of things better as a team where you're at. So, yeah, I think that those are the best possible solutions, especially like you said, the repeat offender one. I think is definitely something that could be implemented. I know is being talked about a lot right now.
Right.
The last thing I want to talk about, especially as it pertains to us at Atavus, right, is you alluded to this earlier. Is it's really about behavioral change. Especially when it comes to coaches and players, I think, because that's who's on the field, that's who's being taught, and who are the teachers, in a sense,
Right, right,
right. And so, talk to us. And at Atavus, we take our approach as a system rather than just a technique or just analytics. We from top to bottom, start to finish, we take our technique and analysis and pair it together to help create behavioral change and educate players and coaches on how to get better and improve. So. Talk to us how, from our perspective at Atavus, the whole Atavus Tackle System, how does it work? How does it all kind of come together and create that behavioral change through what we do?
Yeah. So I speak a lot about this to the coaches that we work with and the players as well. I think there's 3 things that go into it. First is identifying the situations. Okay. So developing situational awareness. For us, that might be our tackle wheel. So are you in a positive? Are you in a negative situation? What is the important elements to focus on in those situations to be successful and safe? That's first. Then secondly is the fact that we label the issues and we analyze every tackle from every game. So what do you have from that, Jake? You have concrete, tangible evidence where you can point back to a specific play, tackle, or sequence in a game, and we can label that through our cut-up process or whatever. It could be a simple call, or maybe it's something that we identify on Friday or Saturday, and we can pull that clip and say, hey, coach, maybe you look out for something like, be aware of these type of situations. Although it didn't warrant a penalty, it could have been. I've had multiple conversations, Jake, with coaches that have sometimes got targeting calls, and they'll send me those tackles and say, hey, does this meet the criteria? Do we have the ability to appeal this call? And sometimes I agree, and sometimes I say, hey, coach, based on this, you might be able to appeal this, right? So having those conversations, being able to have that in your back pocket as a coach is key. And then lastly is like our actionable insights, so our tackle plans. Okay, so how do we combat that? It's through our drill work, and it's like their prescription. So if you have an issue on that game, whether it be pre-contact, but more specifically to the targeting, would be a contact issue, right, Jake? So pad level, striking with your near shoulder, having a good punch. Those are all things that we can identify through our reports and then apply that through a tackle plan that week, and then moving forward, we can keep on working on that situation. Biggest thing I always see when it comes to targeting is either poor pad level, so hitting without the strike zone, hitting outside the strike zone. So for our audience, for us at Atavus, we talk about below the shoulder pec to above the knees roughly. And what that does is, every tackler is going to have a different aiming point, but we have multiple drills where we actually start our defenders on the ground, on their knees, and they work their way up to their feet. That way we're teaching them their strike point and where they're the most powerful and safe. And we also talk about the offensive player, right, Jake, where we want them to have a tucked chin, protect their knees, maybe have a crash pad. We give all that insight to the coach. That way they can work on this in a practice setting where hopefully it would translate to a game. And that's the biggest thing I think that we do when we separate ourselves is, like I mentioned, the actionable insights, but also the tackle plan and the progression to really drive that behavioral change that we talk so much about.
Yeah, 100%. Like you described it perfectly from top to bottom. We have a technique. Lots of people have technique that's, but we focus on near shoulder, right? Keeping the head out, near foot, near shoulder. But then we take it, what you and your team do, take it to the next step and provide the analysis. And then not only provide the analysis, but interpret that data and that analysis to our coaches and to our players that we work with And then I love the word you used in the term prescribe the solution through our drills and our tackle plans and stuff like that to work on what needs to be worked on and improve going forward. So thank you for that insight as well, that great explanation that I think a lot of people can take and learn from as well, that it's a multi-step approach, right? It's not just teaching someone a technique or doing analytics. It's to really create that behavioral change. It's an entire process and system to do so. That's gonna wrap it up then for our talk today. Again, I hope you learned a little something on what we do at Atavus, but also more insight into targeting the rule itself and kind of all the talk that's around it right now in the day of football, and maybe, you know, how we can improve the game through it going forward. So if you like the video, please click the like button. Please subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment. Maybe you have another solution to the targeting rule that we would love to hear about. So please leave a comment. We'll be back with more videos and more content in the future. Scott, thanks again for joining us today and giving those great insights. Until then, we're out.
All right. See you, Jake. Appreciate you guys.